Wyoming Territory, autumn of 1879. The wind had teeth that morning, and so did her father's voice when he told her she was to marry a man she barely knew. Perla Sutton stood at the edge of the barnyard, her breath frosting in the air, hands clenched around the handles of a saddlebag packed in secret. Behind her, the ranch house loomed like a prison. Her wedding was set for Sunday. It was Thursday. She would be gone before sundown. The man chosen for her, an older cattle broker named Vernon Hale, had a twice-broken nose, yellow teeth, and a cruel laugh. He had land and money, and that was all her father needed to hear. Perla had tried to argue, pleaded even, but the moment she raised her voice, he had struck her across the mouth. Now she had a split lip and a plan. She stole her brother's horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Jasper, and rode north out of Green River before sunrise, the town fading behind a curtain of dust. She had no clear direction, only the names of mountain passes she had read in dime novels and a river trail that, if followed long enough, would bring her into open country, into safety, into something that might feel like her own life. By nightfall, her thighs ached, her lips were chapped raw, and she had no fire. She slept beneath a cluster of cottonwoods, the saddle for a pillow, her father's voice still echoing in her head. "You will marry him. That's the end of it." She woke to gunfire. Crack. Then silence. Another shot, closer. Jasper reared and nearly broke free of his tether. Perla scrambled to her feet, heart thudding. In the silver wash of dawn, a shape moved through the trees. A man. Tall, broad-shouldered, rifle in hand. He was walking toward her, not fast, not slow, steady, like someone used to danger. "Do not move," she called, voice sharp. The man raised one hand. "Easy, miss. Just cleared out a coyote sniffing around your horse." She watched him step into full view. He had a shaggy brown coat dusted with trail dirt, a faded blue shirt beneath it, and his hat was pulled low over dark, wind-blown hair. His face was lean, with a hard jaw and a shadow of stubble. He looked about 30, maybe a little older. "I do not need help," she said, still holding the small pistol she had taken from her father's desk. He nodded, unfazed. "You would if that coyote got spooked and ran your horse off." He motioned to Jasper, who stood wild-eyed but unharmed. "Name's Prescott Orley. I was camped a mile downriver and heard the shots. That yours?" "No," she admitted, lowering the pistol. "But thank you." He stepped closer, his gaze flicking to the saddlebag, then to her torn skirt hem. "You running?" Perla stiffened. "That is none of your business." Prescott studied her for a beat. "All right." She expected more questions, maybe judgment, but he only turned, walked back to his own horse, and began packing up his camp. Before he mounted, he called over his shoulder. "There's a ranch about 20 miles west. Good folks. If you were looking for work or a place to rest, they might take you on." Perla hesitated. She had no destination, no plan beyond getting away. "Are you going there?" "I am." She looked at Jasper, then at the wide emptiness around her. "Would you mind if I rode with you? Just until the ranch." Prescott nodded once. "Fine by me." They rode side by side most of the morning, neither speaking much. The silence settled between them easy as dust. When they stopped for water, she noticed the way he checked his horse's hooves before his own needs, that he carried a tin locket in his pocket and sometimes turned it in his fingers when he thought she was not looking. By sundown, they reached the edge of a ridge overlooking the valley. A ranch lay below, smoke rising from a chimney, fences lining golden pastures. Prescott pointed. "That is the McKinnon place. They will feed you, maybe let you stay if you work hard." "Are you staying there too?" He nodded. "I help out sometimes, fix fences, ride herd." Perla looked down at her hands. "I cannot stay long. Just need a place to catch my breath." He met her eyes. No one will ask questions. Least not from me. That night, they ate stew in the warm kitchen of the main house, and the McKinnon matron, a sturdy older woman named Hattie, gave Perla a cot in the sewing room. Prescott disappeared after dinner, but Perla saw the way he paused at the door, like he wanted to say something and could not find the words. The next days passed in rhythm. Perla mended torn shirts, helped Hattie with the goats, and learned how to chop wood without blistering her palms. Prescott came and went, fixing a broken fence post, helping herd cattle in from the high pasture. He never pressed her, never asked why she had run, but Perla caught him watching her sometimes, eyes soft with something that made her chest ache. One afternoon, while helping him load hay onto a wagon, she slipped and nearly fell. His hands caught her waist, steadying her. "You all right?" he asked. Her breath caught. His touch was warm, his grip strong. Yes. He did not let go right away. When he did, her skin burned where his hands had been. Later, she found him by the barn, oiling his saddle. "Why did you not ask where I came from?" Prescott looked up, quiet for a moment. "Because sometimes the past is not worth dragging into the light unless someone wants it there." She stepped closer. "I was supposed to marry a man who scared me. My father would not listen. So I left." He put the oilcloth down, eyes meeting hers. "You did the right thing." Something shifted between them, then not loud, not fast, just a quiet understanding. A door opening. The next morning a rider came, dusty, angry, and carrying her father's voice in his mouth. "She is here," the man shouted, dismounting fast. "Perla Sutton. Her father sent me." Prescott stepped in front of her before she could speak. "She is not going anywhere." The man sneered. "You think you can hide her?" "I have orders." "I do not care who gave them," Prescott said, voice low and calm. "She is not property. She is not a prize. She is free now." The man reached for his pistol. Prescott was faster. The shot rang out across the yard. The man dropped, wounded in the arm, cursing. Hattie ran out with a rifle, face pale. Perla stood behind Prescott, shaking. He turned to her. "You all right?" She nodded, and then, without thinking, stepped into him. His arms folded around her without hesitation. She buried her face in his chest, heart pounding. "I was so scared," she whispered. "You are safe now," he said, his hand stroking her back. And in that moment she believed him. Perla kept her hands busy the next week, though her thoughts wandered. The sewing room where she slept had a narrow window that faced west, and each evening she watched the last light stretch across the fields until it disappeared behind the hills. The days grew colder. A frost came and stayed. She mended coats, scrubbed floors, and kept close to Hattie, who never asked for explanations. Prescott never spoke of the man who rode in shouting her name. The McKinnons had handled the matter quietly, sending word to the sheriff in Rock Springs that the man had fired first. Nothing more was said, but Perla caught the way Prescott kept his rifle within reach now, and how his eyes tracked any rider passing near the gate. One morning, she found him brushing down his horse beneath the lean-to beside the barn. She hesitated at the door, unsure if she was interrupting. "You come for the saddle oil or just the quiet?" he asked without turning. "I came to ask what's in the other direction." He paused, then looked over his shoulder. "East." She nodded. "Fort Bridger's out that way. Rail line runs near it. Past that's nothing but scrub and wind for 100 miles. "I thought maybe I'd go," she said, though her voice faltered. Prescott put down the brush. "You don't sound sure." "I'm not," she admitted. "I've never had to decide where to go before." He leaned against the wooden beam, arms crossed, watching her. "Then maybe don't rush it. I don't want to stay here if it puts you in danger." "That wasn't your doing." That man made his own trouble. Perla clasped her fingers together. Still, I've brought it. Prescott's gaze softened, but he didn't step closer. You think the rest of us haven't dragged our share of trouble across these fields? She didn't answer, but her shoulders eased. That night, after supper, the sky turned a hard slate color, and wind swept down the valley. Hattie lit lamps early, and Prescott offered to check the barn doors before bed. Perla followed, pulling her shawl tighter as she stepped into the cold. Inside, the horses shifted in their stalls, uneasy from the storm's scent. Prescott adjusted a latch, then looked over at her. You ever ride in snow? No, it's slow, wet, and miserable, he said. But quiet. Everything comes down to sound and breath. I think I'd like that. He tilted his head. You would. She stepped closer. What makes you so sure? You listen more than you talk, and you move like someone who's learned to read silence. Perla swallowed. You said you work here sometimes. Where do you go the rest of the time? He didn't answer right away. Then, used to be a scout west of Rawlins. Helped survey cattle trails. After that, I drifted. Some ranches, some freight work. Never stayed long anywhere. Why? He looked down at his hands. Didn't see the point. And now? Prescott's jaw worked for a moment. Then he shrugged. Now there's a woman sleeping in the sewing room who knows how to sharpen a knife and thread a needle without blinking. That's worth sticking around for. Perla felt her chest tighten. Are you saying that because you think I want you to? No, he said. I'm saying it because it's true. She stepped closer, the scent of hay and cold air between them. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this. You don't have to do anything. I want to. Prescott reached out slowly, as if giving her time to change her mind. His hand brushed her cheek, rough knuckles against soft skin. She didn't pull away. She leaned into him first. It wasn't a kiss like in stories No Fire. No sweeping, just the gentle press of understanding, of two people who knew what it meant to hide and still be seen. When they parted, he looked at her with something steadier than desire. You don't need to go east, he said. I know. They walked back to the house in silence, her shoulder brushing his coat with each step. The storm broke loose that night, wind screaming through the eaves, but Perla slept warm beneath two quilts. Her hand curled around the edge of a shirt that smelled faintly of horses and tobacco. The next morning, she didn't look east again. The first snow came quiet, soft as breath. It dusted the tops of the fence rails and clung to the branches of the cottonwoods like lace. Perla stood outside the bunkhouse early in the morning, arms crossed over her shawl, watching the flakes spin and fall. The air smelled of wood smoke and damp wool. Inside, the fire still burned low from the night before, but she hadn't been able to sleep. Prescott came up behind her, coat collar turned up, his steps muffled by the fresh snow. He didn't speak at first, just stood beside her, eyes on the hills. You always rise this early? She asked, not looking at him. He rubbed a gloved hand along his jaw. Used to be I slept wherever I could find a dry place. This beats waking up under a wagon. Perla turned toward him. You ever think about buying land? He nodded slowly. I've thought about it more lately. You'd settle here? I might. She looked back at the pasture. Seems like the kind of place that asks something of you. Prescott's voice was quiet. Everything worth keeping does. Later that morning, Hattie sent them out to cut a pine that had fallen across the east fence line. The snow came heavier by the time they reached it, flakes clinging to their eyelashes, stiffening their coats. Prescott handled the axe while Perla cleared the smaller limbs. When the trunk finally split, he paused, breath fogging the air. You ever think about what you want next? He asked, eyes still on the stump. I'm not sure I know how to want things, she said. Not yet. I've always been told, Never asked. Prescott leaned on the axe handle. Maybe that's where you start. With the asking. She looked at him then. Really looked. The curve of his neck beneath the scarf. The way his hands worked without needing thought. There was a steadiness in him she hadn't known she needed. How'd you know how to stand up to that rider? She asked. He didn't hesitate. I've seen men try to take what wasn't theirs. I've seen what happens when nobody stops them. They loaded the cut pine onto the sled and started back across the ridge. The snow deepened, muting the sound of the runners. Perla walked beside him, the rope rough in her hands. You ever lose someone? She asked. Prescott's jaw tightened. A brother. Years back up in Montana. He was younger. Got fever on the trail. She didn't speak for a long time. He was the only one who believed I'd grow up all right, he said. Even when I didn't believe it. I think he was right. Prescott glanced at her. So do I. That evening, after supper, the McKinnon boys played cards in the main room while Hattie spun wool near the stove. Perla lingered by the window, watching the snow drift past the glass. Prescott approached, his steps quiet on the worn floorboards. I fixed the latch on the shed. Should hold through the wind. Good, she said, voice low. He studied her face, then nodded toward the door. Walk. They stepped into the cold together, the lantern on the porch leaving a golden circle in the snow. Beyond it, the ranch lay dark and still, the only sound the hush of wind moving through pine. Prescott stopped near the edge of the fence, resting one hand on the rail. I don't want to rush you. You're not, she said. He hesitated. But I want to be clear. Perla stepped closer, face tipped up to his. So be clear. He took her hand, his palm warm against her fingers. I want to build something steady, with someone who sees the world the way I do. Slow, honest, worth the work. She didn't pull away. And you think I see it that way? I know you do. The wind curled around them, sharp and clean. Perla looked at their joined hands. I don't have anything to offer you except myself. That's the part one want. She drew a breath and let it out slow. Then yes. Prescott reached up and cupped her cheek, the gesture careful, reverent. She leaned into his touch, eyes closing. There was no rush in the kiss that followed. It was quiet and sure, the kind of kiss that settled between two people like roots taking hold. When it ended, she didn't step back. I never expected this, she murmured. Neither did I, he said. But I'm not letting it go. The snow kept falling, soft and white, covering the last tracks of the path that had brought her here. The days shortened. By late afternoon, the fields lay in shadow, and the lanterns were lit before supper. Inside the bunkhouse, firewood cracked in the stove, casting flickering warmth across the floorboards. Perla had taken to keeping her sewing kit beside the hearth, patching gloves and worn sleeves for the ranch hands in exchange for stories they told in low voices, half for her benefit, half for the comfort of their own remembering. Prescott came in late most nights, smelling of leather and frost, shoulders heavy with quiet. He never asked where she'd been during the day, and she never asked what he'd seen out on the range. What they shared grew not from the telling but from the living small things stitched into place like hems turned under. One morning, Hattie sent them to retrieve salt blocks from a supply shed 2 miles east, beyond the windbreak. The snow had stopped, but the air held a brittle edge, and frost laced the dry grass in the gulch. They took the sled, Prescott walking beside the mule, Perla bundled in a wool coat with her hands tucked beneath her arms. You think you'll stay through spring? He asked, voice low against the wind. I haven't thought that far, she said. But I haven't thought of leaving either. He gave a slow nod, eyes on the trail ahead. I've been offered a small corner of land near the creek. McKinnon said I could work it if I wanted. Perla looked at him, heart catching. Would you? Depends, he said. It's not much, just enough for a cabin and a pen or two. Maybe a milk cow. She didn't answer right away. A magpie flew low across the trail, startling the mule. Prescott steadied the reins with a soft cluck of his tongue. I know how to keep a ledger, she said. Could help with any trading you do. He glanced over. I believe that. They reached the shed by midday. The roof had collapsed at one corner, and the door leaned off its hinges. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and old burlap. Prescott crouched to lift one of the salt blocks, brushing off the grit. Perla stood near the beam, fingers trailing the etched initials someone had carved long ago. Do you think people ever really start over? She asked. He set the block in the sled. Some don't want to. They just want the world to forget what came before. She turned toward him. And you? I think starting over means building something new, not pretending the old never happened. She stepped over the threshold and into the light, her breath a visible thread between them. Then I'd like to try. Prescott straightened, his hands still dusty. With me? Perla nodded. If you'll have me. He took a step forward, brushing a stray strand of hair from her cheek with the back of his fingers. I've been waiting for you to say that. They rode back in silence, the sled creaking behind them. The mule's hooves left crisp prints in the snow, and the wind had softened to a hush. At the fence line, Prescott paused. There's an old root cellar near where that cabin would go, he said. Needs shoring up. I thought I'd start with that. I'll help, she said. At supper, Hattie set down 2 extra plates without comment. The fire burned low, and the room smelled of stewed onions and bread. Perla sat beside Prescott, their knees nearly touching beneath the table. He passed her the salt without a word, and she took it, steady-handed. Later, as the others filed off to bed, Prescott lingered by the stove, oiling his saddle gear. Perla joined him, folding a worn dishcloth in her lap. You're not afraid I'll change my mind? She asked. He looked up. No, why not? Because you don't speak just to fill silence. When you say something, it's already been weighed. She leaned her shoulder against the wall. You seem to know me better than I know myself. Prescott set the tin aside and wiped his hands on a rag. I know what it means to walk away from what you've always been told. You don't do that without knowing yourself deep down. The coals shifted in the stove, sending a faint glow across the floor. Outside, the wind had picked up again, brushing the shutters like fingertips. I'm not the same woman who rode out of Green River, she said. No, he agreed. You're stronger. She reached for his hand, calloused and warm. I want a quiet life, not dull, just honest. One where the days matter because we lived them well. Prescott's fingers closed around hers. Then that's what we'll make, he said. And when she leaned her head against his shoulder, it felt like the beginning of something solid. Not a rescue, not a dream, just the steady, shared work of building a life worth keeping. The ground thawed slow that spring. The snow receded in patches, revealing brittle grass and the flattened husks of last year's weeds. Mud clung to boots and wagon wheels, and the river swelled with meltwater, running fast and opaque with silt. The McKinnon ranch grew busy again, calves born, fences mended, seed ordered in burlap sacks from Cheyenne. Perla no longer lingered by the window. She rose early, washed in cold water, and tied her dark hair up in a kerchief before stepping outside to meet the day. The cabin Prescott planned to build sat on a rise east of the creek, where the wind broke against a line of young cottonwoods. By the end of April, the foundation stones were laid, hauled from the riverbed and set by hand. Perla helped mix lime for mortar, her sleeves rolled and fingers raw, and never once asked how long it would take. She already knew the answer: it would take as long as it needed. One afternoon, as they unloaded planks from the wagon, Prescott paused and pushed his hat up with the back of his wrist. You ever see the ocean? Perla shook her head. Why? Just wondered. I've been told it makes you feel small in a way that's not frightening. Just honest. She ran her hand along the grain of a wide board. I think I've felt that once. Not with the ocean, but something like it. Prescott looked at her, his expression unreadable. I never thought I'd feel it standing still, she added. He set down the board carefully. You're not scared of what comes next? I'm scared it'll pass too fast. They worked until the light dipped behind the ridge, and the shadows of the trees stretched across the field in long, reaching shapes. Back at the main house, Hattie served biscuits and boiled potatoes with sausage. After the meal, the younger McKinnon boys drifted outside to tend the lanterns, and Hattie sat darning socks by the stove. Prescott poured 2 mugs of coffee and handed one to Perla without a word. They stepped out onto the porch, the air still and close. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called low. I got a letter, Perla said, her voice quiet. Prescott didn't answer at first. From who? My brother Emery. He says our father's taken sick. Wants me to come home. Prescott turned slightly, but didn't speak. I'm not going, she added. He studied her face. You sure? She nodded. I carried that name like a weight. I don't need to watch it fade. Emery understood. He only wanted me to know. Prescott took a sip of coffee. You're not the same woman they sent away. They never really saw who I was. He reached for her hand, brush rough and steady. I see you. The next day, they raised the frame of the cabin. McKinnon lent his sons and a team of mules, and by dusk the bones of the house stood tall against the fading sky. Perla stood beneath the doorframe as Prescott hammered the last nail in place. She looked up at the angled rafters and the space between them, open to the sky. It already feels like home, she said. Prescott came down the ladder, wiping sweat from his brow. Then let's finish it right. They shingled the roof with pine shakes, built a hearth from fieldstone, and carved a mantel from a cedar beam. Perla stitched curtains from thick muslin, and with help from Hattie, pieced together a quilt in shades of rust and charcoal. Every board, every joint, every seam held the mark of their hands. By early June, the cabin was ready. They moved in with a cedar chest, a rocking chair, and 2 enamel plates. Prescott carried her across the threshold, not with flourish but quiet certainty, his arms strong and sure around her. She laughed into his shoulder, her face bright with joy. That night, after the fire burned low, she lay beside him beneath their quilt, listening to the wind pass gently through the trees. You were right about starting over, she said. I didn't know it'd feel like this. Like what? Like I was meant to build it with you. She touched his face, her fingers soft against his jaw. I've never been more sure of anything. They kissed slow, unhurried, the kind of closeness born from days spent working side by side, from glances across muddy fields, from knowing without asking. When they drew apart, the silence that followed was full, not empty. Spring turned to summer. The grass grew tall around the cabin, and wildflowers bloomed in the meadow. Perla planted turnips and beans in a small tilled plot, while Prescott added a lean-to for tools. They traded eggs for sugar, built a shelf for books, and hung a horseshoe above the door, nailed in place with care. One morning, Perla stood at the creek washing linens, her feet bare in the cold water, skirts lifted just above her ankles. Prescott came down the slope with a basket of firewood and paused, watching her. You planning to stay out here all day? He asked. Might. He set the basket down and walked in, boots and all. She laughed as he splashed toward her, catching her around the waist and lifting her off her feet. You'll ruin your socks, she said, smiling. Already done. She leaned her forehead to his. "You'll never leave again, will you?" "Not unless you ask me to." "I won't." They stood there as the water rushed past their ankles and the sky stretched wide above them, a deep, endless blue. Years passed. Seasons came and went. The river froze and thawed. The wind shifted, and the cottonwoods grew thicker at the edge of the field. Their house remained solid and warm. They added a cradle, then a second, each child a stitch in the fabric of their life. Neighbors came to call, and Hattie visited often, her hands still busy even in old age. Perla kept her sewing needles sharp, and Prescott taught their eldest to drive fence posts in straight. They grew older without noticing, their days full of the quiet kind of happiness most folks never get close enough to touch. They never spoke of the life she left behind. It was gone, like snow melt into the river, and what remained was this: the steady hum of chores, the warmth of a shared fire, the feeling, each morning, of waking beside someone who chose you not once, but every day. And when they sat together on the porch in the evenings, worn hands linked, eyes on the horizon, they didn't need to say a word. The love between them was made not of promises or declarations, but of proof, 1,000 small moments, lived honestly, held close. They had built their peace, plank by plank, and they never let it slip.